If someone had told me 10 years ago, when I first met Liam, that he would one day be asleep on my couch, his presence filling my small apartment like a slow-moving storm, I would have laughed. Not a real laugh, but that tight, anxious sound I made when confronted with an impossibility so beautiful it hurt. Liam was a creature of sunlight and solid ground, of loud bars and easy confidence. I was a man of shadows and routines, my world contained within the four walls of my apartment and the glowing rectangle of my computer screen. We were a paradox, a friendship that should have withered but instead had stubbornly, painfully endured. My life was a carefully curated collection of quiet moments. The hiss of the espresso machine at 7 in the morning. The specific slant of afternoon light across my drafting table. The low hum of the city 10 floors below, a distant engine that never troubled my peace. I worked from home as a graphic designer, a job that suited my temperament perfectly. I could manipulate color and shape, create order from chaos, all without ever having to engage in the messy, unpredictable art of small talk. My solitude was a fortress, and I was its contented king. Then there was Liam. Liam, who I had loved in some secret, subterranean way since we were 19. He was my opposite in every conceivable metric. Where I was hesitant, he was decisive. Where I was quiet, he was a symphony of noise. The heavy tread of his work boots, the booming laugh that could fill a stadium, the sheer, unapologetic space he took up in the world. He was a construction manager, a tamer of steel and concrete, a man who bent the physical world to his will. I had always believed with a certainty that felt like a stone in my gut, irrevocably straight. This certainty was the foundation of our friendship. It was the great, unbreachable wall that kept my feelings contained. It allowed me to watch him date a string of bright, smiling women, to listen to his frustrations about work, to be his steadfast, reliable, and utterly platonic friend Leo. The distance was a form of self-preservation, a necessary agony. I kept him at arm's length emotionally, even when he was sitting right beside me, because getting any closer felt like tempting a fire that would surely consume me. He was the sun, and I knew better than to fly too close. The disruption came on a Tuesday, a day no different from any other, until my phone buzzed with his name. I ignored the first call, deep in the precise alignment of a new logo. The second call I let go to voicemail, but the third, a minute later, sent a spike of pure adrenaline through my chest. Liam never called 3 times. He was a one-call and a text kind of man. I answered, my voice tight. "Everything okay?" His voice was rough, scraped raw. "Let me go, Leo, just 4 words." 4 words that bulldozed the carefully constructed peace of my afternoon. I could hear the city traffic behind him, the sound tinny and distant. He wasn't a sight. He was on the street. What? What do you mean? I asked, my own carefully ordered world tilting on its axis. Got laid off. Project funding pulled. The whole team. There was a pause, a shaky breath. The apartment was tied to the job. I have to be out by Friday. My heart did a painful little flip. The fortress walls were trembling. "Liam, where are you going to go?" The silence on his end stretched, filled with a static of unspoken panic that I could feel even through the phone. It was a sound I had never heard from him before. Desperation. "That's kind of why I'm calling," he finally said, his voice smaller than I had ever heard it. "I know it's a huge ask, but could I maybe crash on your couch? Just for a little while? Just until I get my feet back under me." The world stopped. My quiet apartment, my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude. And Liam, in it, not for a few hours to watch a game, but indefinitely, sleeping, breathing, existing in my space. It was a terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly impossible thought. My silence was my hesitation, a frantic calculation of the risks. But his silence was the sound of a man drowning. Yeah, I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign in my own mouth. "Of course, man. The couch is yours." And just like that, the world I knew was over. The carefully built dam had cracked, and I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that a flood was coming. He arrived on Friday evening, carrying one large duffel bag and a cardboard box filled with an odd assortment of his life. a framed photo of his college football team, a few worn paperbacks, a coffee mug shaped like a hammer, his work boots still caked with a fine layer of dust. He set them down by the door, and they looked alien against the clean, minimalist lines of my apartment. Intrusions from another world. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of his usual armor of confidence. His shoulders, normally so broad and straight, had a slight slump to them. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was deeply unsettled. "Thanks again for this, Leo," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I swear it'll just be for a week or two. It's fine," I said, the lie tasting like ash. "Take as long as you need." The first few days were an exercise in excruciating awareness. My apartment, once a space that felt like an extension of my own body, was suddenly foreign territory. I was a guest in my own home. Every creak of the floorboards, every cough from the living room was Liam. His presence was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of my skin. I tried to maintain my routine. I would get up at my usual 7, but now I did it silently, creeping to the kitchen like a thief. I'd make my coffee, acutely aware of the sleeping giant on my couch, his long frame barely contained by its length, one arm slung over his eyes to block out the morning light. I'd retreat to my office and close the door, but the barrier felt flimsy, imaginary. He was still there. I started to observe him in a way I never had before. When you only see a friend for a few hours at a time, you see the performance, the public face, but forced proximity strips all that away. I saw the Liam that existed between the moments of bravado. I saw the deep lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. I saw the way his jaw clenched when he was scrolling through job sites on his laptop, the quiet frustration simmering just below the surface. I noticed a small, pale scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a detail I'd never registered in a decade of friendship. I saw his hands, truly saw them for the first time. They were tools, not ornaments. Calloused and capable, with nicks and old cuts mapping out a history of hard work. They were hands that built things, and now they lay idle in his lap, looking lost. One evening, he was on the phone with his father, his voice low and tight. He'd retreated to the small balcony, but with the sliding door cracked open, I could hear the clipped, tense exchange. I heard phrases like disappointment and should have had a backup plan when he came back inside. His face was a mask of stone, but I saw the flicker of deep hurt in his eyes before he could hide it. He looked weary, not just tired, but soul-weary. It was a vulnerability I had never been allowed to witness before, and it made something in my chest ache with a fierce, protective tenderness. He was unexpectedly kind. He started making coffee for me in the mornings, leaving a mug on my desk before I even came out of my room. He learned I hated doing dishes and took over the task without a word. He was competent in a way that was completely different from my own abilities. One afternoon, my sink started making a horrific gurgling noise. I was about to call the building superintendent, a process I dreaded, when Liam simply knelt, peered under the sink, and with a few deft twists of a wrench I didn't even know I owned, fixed it. He rose, wiping his hands on his jeans. "All set," he said, as if it were nothing. I was the one with the stable job, the apartment, the one offering help. But in that moment, watching him so easily command the physical world that so often baffled me, the power dynamic felt completely inverted. He was grounded, capable. I was the one who felt adrift. He was caring for me, in his own quiet way, and it leveled a playing field I hadn't even realized was tilted. He wasn't just my charity case. He was becoming my partner in this strange, temporary domesticity. The first touch happened a week into his stay. It was late, and we were on the couch, watching some mindless action movie. A storm was raging outside, rain lashing against the windows, the wind howling a lonely song. The sound insulated us, creating a small bubble of warmth and light in the vast, dark city. My couch was not designed for two grown men. It was a sleek, modern thing I'd bought for its aesthetic, not for comfort or capacity. We sat with a carefully maintained buffer space between us, a foot of neutral territory. But as the movie wore on, the space began to shrink. A shift here, a lean there. I was hyper-aware of his thigh, the solid muscle of it, just inches from my own. I could feel the heat radiating from him, a stark contrast to the cold glass of the window near my shoulder. I was so focused on maintaining the distance that I didn't notice he'd fallen asleep until his head, heavy and warm, slumped sideways and came to rest on my shoulder. My entire body went rigid, every muscle locked, my breath caught in my throat. I stared straight ahead at the flashing screen, but I couldn't see it. My entire universe had contracted to the single point of contact on my shoulder. The weight of his head, the soft tickle of his hair against my neck, the faint, clean scent of his shampoo. Panic, hot and sharp, flared in my chest. A frantic trapped bird beating its wings against my ribs. Move. I have to move. Wake him up. This is wrong. He'll wake up and be weirded out. He'll know. But I didn't move. Beneath the panic, something else bloomed. A slow, spreading warmth that had nothing to do with his body heat. It was a feeling so potent, so long-starved, that it overwhelmed everything else. For 10 years, I had orbited this man, and now, for the first time, a piece of him was resting on me. Willingly, trustingly. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat. I told myself it was an accident, a fluke of sleep. It meant nothing. But my body betrayed me, leaning into the contact almost imperceptibly. I let my own head tilt just a fraction of an inch until my temple brushed against his hair. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure, terrifying bliss. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, a statue carved from anxiety and longing, until the movie ended and the credits rolled in silence. I didn't dare breathe. I didn't dare move. I just let him sleep, carrying the impossible, wonderful weight of him. The power dynamic began to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways. The man who had entered my apartment as a refugee was slowly becoming a fixture, a part of the architecture of my life. The initial awkwardness of sharing a space began to melt into a strange, comfortable rhythm. One afternoon, I found him staring at his laptop with a look of murderous frustration. He was trying to reformat his resume, and the template he downloaded was fighting him at every turn. Text boxes refused to align, fonts changed at random. He, a man who could command a team of 50 workers and operate heavy machinery, was being defeated by a word processor. "This damned thing," he muttered, running a hand through his hair in exasperation. "It's like trying to nail jelly to a tree." I hesitated in the doorway of my office, then stepped forward. "Here, let me see," he sighed and slid over on the chair. I pulled up another and sat beside him, our knees brushing under the small desk. Another jolt, another internal moment of panic that I had to ruthlessly suppress. I focused on the screen, on the familiar digital landscape. I took the mouse from him, my fingers brushing his. The contact was fleeting, accidental, but it sent a fresh wave of heat through my system. "You just have to anchor the text boxes to the paragraph markers," I explained, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. My world was code and pixels. This was my territory. In a few clicks, I had tamed the unruly document. I fixed the formatting, adjusted the margins, and turned his chaotic draft into a clean, professional-looking resume. He watched me, silent and intent. I could feel his gaze on the side of my face. When I was done, I pushed the laptop back toward him. "There. Should be good now." He stared at the screen for a long moment. "How did you do that?" he asked, a note of genuine awe in his voice. "It's what I do," I said with a shrug, trying to downplay the flutter in my stomach. "Just moving things around until they look right, yo," he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were dark and serious. "Thanks, Leo." I was about to throw this thing out the window in that moment. The roles were completely reversed. I was the capable one, the problem solver. I had offered him a skill he didn't possess, a piece of my quiet competence. I had taken care of him. It was a small thing, a 5-minute fix, but it felt monumental. It leveled the ground between us, making me feel less like his host and more like his equal. It was the first time I felt like he needed me for something other than my couch. The nights became the hardest. During the day, we could maintain a fiction of busyness. He would be on his laptop, I would be in my office. We were roommates, nothing more. But at night, the apartment shrank. The silence was heavier, filled with unspoken things. One night, a week or so after the resume incident, the storm returned, bigger and angrier than before. The power flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging the apartment into a sudden, shocking darkness. My breath hitched. I'd always hated the dark, the way it erased the familiar and made my own home feel alien. Whoa! Liam's voice came from the living room, calm and steady. A reassuring anchor in the blackness. "You okay?" "Yeah." I lied, my heart starting to pound. "Just dark." A moment later, I saw the beam of a flashlight. It was the one from his phone. He was standing in the doorway, the light illuminating him from below, carving his face into dramatic planes of shadow and light. He looked like something ancient and mythic. "I've got some candles in the kitchen," I said, my voice a little shaky. He followed me, his flashlight beam dancing on the walls. We found the candles and a lighter. Soon, the living room was filled with a soft, flickering glow. The effect was transformative. The sharp, modern edges of my apartment softened. The shadows grew deep and mysterious. The world outside vanished behind the rain-streaked windows. It was just the two of us, trapped in a small, golden bubble of light. We sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, a bottle of whiskey I'd forgotten I owned open between us. The alcohol, combined with the intimacy of the setting, worked to dissolve our remaining inhibitions. The conversation started with his job search, his frustrations, but soon drifted into deeper waters. He talked about the pressure he'd always felt from his dad to be a certain kind of man. Tough, unflappable, successful. He confessed that he'd never even really wanted to go into construction, but it was expected of him. "I think," he said, staring into the candle flame, his voice low and raw, "I think getting fired might be the best thing that ever happened to me. It's like I was running a race I didn't even want to be in, and I finally tripped." He turned to look at me, his eyes searching mine in the flickering light. "This is the first time in years I've felt quiet. In my head, I mean. Being here, with you, my heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest." The air was thick, charged with the whiskey and the rain and his confession. All the things I kept locked away for a decade were pushing against my teeth, demanding to be spoken. "You're the only person I've ever been able to be completely real with, Leo," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Everyone else gets the show. The big, loud, got it all together, Liam. But you see the mess. And you don't run." He was closer now. I hadn't even noticed him move. The space between us had evaporated. I could feel the warmth of his breath, smell the whiskey on it. My carefully constructed walls were crumbling, turning to dust. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but for the first time, the longing was stronger. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was him leaning in. Maybe it was me tilting my head up. It didn't matter. It was a mutual surrender. His lips met mine. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss like in the movies. It was slow, hesitant, a question. His lips were soft, questioning. His stubble was a rough, pleasant friction against my skin. It was a kiss of profound, terrifying honesty. I could feel a decade of unspoken friendship, of secret longing, of quiet observation, all culminating in this one impossible moment. I brought a trembling hand up to his jaw, my fingers sinking into the rough texture of his 5 o'clock shadow. He deepened the kiss, a soft noise of surrender rumbling in his chest. It was a sound of homecoming. It was the sound of my entire world breaking apart and reassembling itself into a new, unbelievable shape. The storm raged outside, but inside my small, candlelit living room, the world had gone completely, perfectly still. The morning after was a study in silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that felt like a physical weight on my chest. I woke up on the couch, a blanket tangled around my legs, the taste of whiskey and him still on my tongue. The candles had burned down to waxy puddles. The storm had passed. In the clean, unforgiving light of dawn, the magic of the previous night felt like a hallucination. Liam was not there. I sat up, my head pounding, a cold dread seeping into my bones. His duffel bag was still by the door. His shoes were there. He hadn't left the apartment. But the space where he should have been, sleeping on the other end of the couch or in the makeshift bed he usually made on the floor, was empty. The blanket was folded neatly. Too neatly. My stomach filled with a swarm of angry bees. Anxiety, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat. He regrets it. Of course, he regrets it. He was drunk. He was emotional. I took advantage. I ruined everything. The thoughts came in a frantic, self-flagellating spiral. I had destroyed a decade of friendship for one stupid, selfish moment. I had misread everything. I heard the shower running in the bathroom. The sound was a torment. He was washing it away. Washing me away. I scrambled up, my movements jerky and uncoordinated, and retreated to the safety of my office, closing the door behind me. I sat in front of my computer, the screen blank, and stared at my own reflection. The face looking back was pale, haunted. The fool who flew too close to the sun and was now falling, wings melted, back to earth. When he finally emerged from the bathroom, the silence that followed was worse than any argument. It was a living entity, a third person in the apartment with us. It sat between us at the kitchen counter as I pretended to check emails and he pretended to read the news on his phone. The easy camaraderie we had built over the past few weeks was gone, shattered. In its place was this brittle, unbearable tension. He wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on a screen, his jaw tight. I wanted to say something, anything to break the spell. Are you okay? Did last night happen? Am I insane? But the words were trapped behind a wall of fear. Fear of his answer. Fear of confirming my worst-case scenario, that it was a mistake. A drunken mistake he already wished he could take back. This went on for 2 days. 2 days of living with a ghost. We moved around each other in the small apartment like reluctant magnets, repelling each other with a force that was almost physical. The space that had started to feel like a shared home now felt like a cage. My sanctuary had become my prison. The solitude I once cherished now felt like a punishment, a sharp, painful reminder of what I had tasted and lost. His presence was an absence. He was there, but he was gone. I barely slept. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, searching for clues I might have missed. Had I forced him? Had he pulled away? No, he had deepened it. He had made that sound in his chest. But the evidence of the present was undeniable. The silence, the avoidance, the cold, hard wall he had erected between us. My hope dwindled, replaced by a dull, aching resignation. I had ruined the most important relationship in my life. On the third morning, I woke up to the sound of him packing. The distinct, final sound of a zipper being pulled on a duffel bag. My heart stopped. He was leaving. Of course, he was leaving. He couldn't stand to be in the same space as me anymore. I made him so uncomfortable that he would rather be homeless than stay on my couch. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I lay in my bed, paralyzed by shame and grief, listening to the sounds of his departure. A drawer opening and closing. The soft thud of his boots on the floor. Each sound was a nail in the coffin of our friendship. I just had to wait for the final sound, the click of the front door, and then he would be gone, and I would be alone again, but this time it would be a loneliness so profound it felt like it might actually kill me. But the click of the door never came. Instead, after a long, agonizing silence, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The door opened a crack. Liam stood there, silhouetted against the morning light from the living room window. He looked terrible. His face was pale, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He looked wrecked as I felt. He didn't move from the doorway. "Leo," he said, his voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" I finally found my voice, though it came out as a brittle whisper. "Are you leaving?" He winced, as if the question had physically hurt him. He shook his head. "No, I was unpacking." I stared at him, confused. "Unpacking?" "I put my stuff in the closet," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the living room. I can't do this anymore." My heart plummeted. "Do what?" "This," he said, his voice cracking. "This silence. Pretending that night didn't happen. Pretending I'm not a complete coward." He finally stepped into the room, letting the door click shut behind him. He looked vulnerable, stripped of all his usual defenses. "I'm so sorry, Leo. I've been an idiot." He walked over to the edge of my bed and sat down, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He wouldn't look at me, just stared at his own hands, which were clenched into tight fists in his lap. "I ran," he said, his voice low. "I woke up that morning next to you, and I felt something I've never felt in my entire life. And it terrified me. It wasn't supposed to happen. It's not part of the plan. I'm not supposed to feel this way. Especially not for my best friend." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a confusing mix of fear and desperation. "All my life, I've just done what I was supposed to do. Play football, get the degree, get the job, date the girls. And none of it ever felt right. It was all just a role I was playing. But that night, with you, that was the first thing that's ever felt real. And it scared the hell out of me." The angry bees in my stomach quieted. The cold knot of dread began to melt, replaced by a fragile, tentative warmth. He wasn't disgusted. He was scared, just as scared as I was. "I thought you regretted it." I confessed, my voice barely audible. "I thought I'd ruined everything." A humorless laugh escaped him. "Ruined everything? Leo, you're the only thing that makes sense right now." He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment in the air between us before he gently placed it over mine on the comforter. His touch was warm, solid, real. "I've been in love with you for years," I whispered, the confession tumbling out of me now that the dam was broken. "I just never thought you could feel the same." He squeezed my hand, his thumbs stroking over my knuckles. "How could I not?" he said softly. "You're the one who always saw me, the real me. Not the act." We sat there in silence for a long time, the quiet no longer a weapon, but a comfort. It was a silence filled with understanding, with relief, with the terrifying and beautiful prospect of a new beginning. We were two people who had been navigating by the wrong maps for years, and we had finally, impossibly, found our way to the same place. The territory was new and frightening, but for the first time, we were facing it together. He stayed sitting on the edge of my bed, his hand still covering mine. The morning sun was streaming through the blinds, striping the room with light. It felt like the first day of a new world. "I don't want the couch anymore," he said, his voice firm, breaking the comfortable silence. My breath caught. "Okay," I said, my heart starting to race again, but for a different reason. Not fear, hope. "I was thinking," he continued, turning to face me fully, his gaze intense and unwavering. "My name's not on the lease. We could probably get away with it for a while." I just looked at him, waiting. "I want to stay," he said, the words simple, but carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. "Not as a guest, not as your friend crashing here. I want to stay here, with you." He gestured between us, a small, significant motion. "If you'll have me." It wasn't a grand, romantic declaration. There were no flowers, no sweeping music. It was better than that. It was real. It was a tangible act of commitment, offered from a place of raw vulnerability. He was choosing this, choosing me. He was unpacking his bag and his life, right here in the middle of mine. A slow smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile in days. It felt like my whole body was unclenching, releasing a tension I'd been holding for a decade. "I think," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "that we have plenty of room." He let out a shaky breath of relief, and the smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out after a long storm. It was the Liam I knew, but it was different, too. It was brighter, more real. He leaned in and kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear. It was a kiss of certainty, of promise. A kiss that said I'm not running anymore. It was the beginning of our new life, a life I had never even dared to dream of. The couch in the living room was just a piece of furniture again. It was no longer a barrier or a symbol of our distance. It was just the place where my life had finally, unexpectedly begun. The days that followed were a quiet revelation. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a tentative, blossoming intimacy. We were learning a new language together, a language of small gestures and comfortable silences. The apartment, my solitary fortress, transformed. It became a home. His presence was no longer a disruption, but a baseline, a steady, comforting rhythm beneath my own. Waking up was no longer a solitary act. I would open my eyes to find him there, asleep beside me, his arm thrown protectively over my waist. His quiet breathing was the first sound I heard in the morning, a sound that settled the anxiety that had been my lifelong companion. We started making coffee together. It became a ritual. We'd move around each other in the small kitchen, a clumsy but synchronized dance. His hand would brush mine as we both reached for the mugs. The first few times, I would still feel that jolt of electricity, that flicker of disbelief. But soon, it became normal. The casual, easy touch of a partner. I learned that he liked 2 sugars, a fact I had somehow never known in 10 years. He learned that I couldn't function without that first, scalding hot sip. Meals were no longer silent affairs eaten over my keyboard. We ate at the small dining table, a piece of furniture I had previously used only for sorting mail. We talked. We talked about everything and nothing. About the jobs he was applying for. This time, jobs he was actually interested in, not just ones that paid well. We talked about my design projects. We talked about our childhoods, sharing stories that we had somehow never told each other, filling in the gaps of our shared history. One evening, I was working late, struggling with a difficult client. I was frustrated, hunched over my screen, the cursor blinking mockingly at me. Liam came in and stood behind my chair, his hands coming to rest on my tense shoulders. He began to knead the knots of stress there, his strong, calloused fingers working with a surprising gentleness. "You've been at this for hours," he said softly, his voice a low rumble near my ear. "Take a break." I leaned back in his touch, my eyes closing. The tension in my shoulders began to dissolve under his hands. It was such a simple act of care, but it felt profound. For so long, I had been the sole manager of my own stress, my own life. To have someone else step in, to offer comfort without being asked, was a gift I hadn't known I needed. Sleeping in the same bed was perhaps the biggest change. My bed, which had always felt vast and empty, now felt perfectly sized. The first few nights, I was acutely aware of him, of his warmth, of the space he took up. I lay stiffly, afraid to move, afraid to break the spell. But he was a natural cuddler. In his sleep, he would roll over and pull me against him, his arm hooking around my waist, his face buried in my hair. His body was a solid, reassuring weight against my back. And I, who had always slept so lightly, so restlessly, began to sleep deeper than I ever had in my life. I felt safe. I felt anchored. The couch sat in the living room, a silent witness to our transformation. Sometimes I would look at it and remember that first night he arrived, the awkwardness, the fear, the impossible distance between us. It seemed like a lifetime ago. The man who had slept on that couch, lost and adrift, was gone. The man who lived here now was building a new life, a life I was a part of. The quiet, lonely man who owned the couch was gone, too, replaced by someone who was learning, day by day, how to share his space, his heart, his life. I looked back on my old life, my carefully curated solitude, and it didn't seem peaceful anymore. It seemed empty. I had mistaken quiet for peace and order for happiness. I had built a fortress to protect myself from getting hurt, but I had also locked myself in, away from any chance of real joy. Liam was the disruption, the chaos, the unexpected variable that had shattered my equations. He had stormed into my quiet life, a beautiful, messy, wonderful disaster. He had knocked down my walls and dragged me out into the sunlight. And in the rubble of my old, ordered life, we were building something new, something stronger, something shared. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the one that made the whole story make sense. He wasn't a problem that had landed on my couch. He was the answer to a question I had been too afraid to even ask. He was quite simply my home,